talking surface cleaner seals. Okay guys, we're going to service this swivel here. We're going to start by taking these arms off. Then zip out these 4 mounting bolts, pop this swivel out, get it on the table where we can look at it. These weep holes right here let you know when the shaft seals go bad. When these things start leaking water, you need to do that seal or you'll destroy this bearing in a matter of a week or two. Once rust gets in, water gets in there, it'll start eating up the metal. They'll seize up, and you know, you've seen these swivels, once they seize up, they just have a hard time spinning. So, let's get after it. Have a look here. Okay, so we just got a high pressure filter here. This is because we use these on here because we run 2 number 2 tips for a total of 4 gallons per minute, and when you have tip sizes that small, they constantly clog up. So high pressure filter. But we got a couple of adapter plates here because this Whisper Wash green swivel, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with, is not what comes on those vacuum surface cleaners. Those come with 2 other bearing options, and I don't like either one of them because they're a pain in the ass to keep them running. So We've do some modifications to run this swivel instead, which is just a lot more reliable and easier to work on. But we have to use these spacer plates, so we got to get this thing apart, get this swivel apart, and we'll do a seal replacement kit on it. Okay, so to get this surface cleaner swivel, high pressure swivel, to fit that surface cleaner, we have to use these two adapter plates because the Whisper Wash deck doesn't made up to that steel deck over there. So we got these aluminum adapter plates. We got to separate these plates from this swivel housing so that we can get this nut off. This is where the surface cleaner arms come in at a 90-degree angle, but we can't get this nut off because to grab the shaft is like up inside those adapter plates. So we got to pull these plates off, and then we can get this nut off, and then we can knock this bearing apart. So this is the original mounting ring for the surface cleaner deck on those plastic Whisper Wash decks. But the only thing that's different is these two spacer plates. We use two of them just because these surface cleaner decks sit really low to the ground and the nozzles will hit the ground. So we just sort of put these spacers in here to get the nozzles so they don't, as they're going around the circle, they don't scrape on the ground. They just clear the ground a little bit. So I use two of them. You can have these made. You can have these things made by a machinist, or you can get them. I forget what company makes them, but if you can't find them, check with a company called Ben's Cleaner Sales in Seattle. The guy who's like the one of the main guys there is this kid named Russ. He knows where to get these things if you don't want to have a machinist make them. You can just call that guy, and he can order them for you and send them to you anywhere in the country. Or maybe he might even be able to tell you where to get them. Okay, now we're going to knock off this swivel nut. I don't know what it's called. That is 7/8. And I believe we got 9/16. Let's go see. And I kind of like to do this at a vise, actually. Let's go over to the vise. So we're just going to grab the shaft under there and then just spin it off of that nut. Now it's good to clean this shaft off before you take this thing apart, because what you don't want to do is all the mud, junk that's sort of stuck to the shaft, you're not going to want to drag that through the bearing. You want to have this pretty clean before you take these things apart. And then also whip off your Teflon tape, get it all cleaned up. And I like to get these things wet with some WD-40 and take an air compressor to them. Really good way to clean them off. Okay, so since you don't have a hexagonal surface here, put this in the vise. You're gonna kind of mount it up against this surface here, but you want to use some soft jaws or do something to kind of keep from marring up this aluminum. Just gonna break this lid off here. It's a 1-inch wrench. Set this down here. There we go. Okay, you can see we got a bit of water in there. That's pretty typical when these seals go. We got multiple seals. We got this top gland seal, it's just an O-ring. Got the gland plate, and then there's a seal right here. We're gonna pop this out, replace that one. One more seal here. These are 2 different size seals, and the seal kit comes with everything you need. And then we got our 2 bearings. And we're just gonna be checking this thing to make sure it feels silky. We're gonna check it for silk at idle. We're gonna press up on it and then pull down on it, and it should feel silky both ways. If it feels like it's grindy, that means water has gotten inside these sealed bearings, and basically they started to rust, and the metal is getting pitted and they don't have much life after that. So you save yourself quite a bit of money by doing these seals kits right when these things start leaking. And we may later, if I show you guys the part number on this bearing, it says right there on the top, it's a, let's see, a 5206Z. If you would, probably won't be able to see it, but if you could read those little numbers right there, you got a retaining clip here, and you can pop this clip off, and then this shaft is kind of, for the inside of the bearing, it's kind of like an interference fit, so it takes a little bit to get them out of there, but you can, you know, put the bearings on a vise and then pound the shaft through and they'll come out, but you want to be careful not to ding up these threads, so it's a good idea to put this lock nut on here, a few threads, and then hit the top of that instead of hitting the top of the shaft. And then what you can do is you can replace these bearings, or you can just order a whole new plug from Whisper Wash. They'll just send you out this whole thing that has all this stuff on it. You can just drop it in the housing. But what we're probably going to wind up doing is replacing this with not a 5203Z. We're just going to replace it with the 5203, and that is the same kind of bearing, except it doesn't have this sealing plate that makes it like a sealed bearing. It won't have this plate here, and you'll be able to see the rollers. The reason why we do that is because we would stop hitting these with lithium grease on the inside. We just fill them full of pump oil. So this whole bearing would just be swimming in a bath of pump oil, and that's a really good way to go about it. So make them last a little bit longer. But until these bearings go bad, we'll just leave all these 5303Zs and just roll with the sealed bearing. Because look guys, in pressure washing, you got sealed bearings, but nothing's actually waterproof. Water's gonna get in there, it's gonna ruin it. So what you gotta find a way to do is deal with the fact that nothing is gonna be what it says it's gonna be, and it's gonna get water in it, and it's gonna go bad sooner. So one of the things I like to do is just start having everything swimming in oil. That means if water gets in there, it doesn't matter. And we could do a pretty easy maintenance schedule on to keep them filled with pump oil and just keep the rust out of these things. So we're just gonna take a few minutes, clean up all these parts, and then we'll bust out the seal kit and put the new seals in there. Okay, you can get these seal kits directly off of Whisper Wash's website. They look like that. They come with that O-ring that goes around this gland plate around the outside. along with the seal that fits in there, the seal that fits in there, and an O-ring that fits right there. And then another option you have is if your bearing shaft is just jammed up and the bearings are shot, you can get a whole plug replacement, which is just comes with all the internals. You got the bearings, the plug, the seals are already installed, and you got there's another little seal here that goes in the bottom of the housing, inside a little raceway right there. There's another little rubber seal you don't usually have to replace. Kind of a bitch to dig out, but that's your other option, is to get that whole plug kit. And we really like these bearings a lot better than the Talon. The Mossmatic, which is rebranded on Steel Eagle's website, is the Talon, which is basically it's the same thing as a Mossmatic. What do they call those things? DYZ. I think it's called a Mossmatic DYZ. They just the bearing's not as stable. They don't seal up as good. They're a lot more prone to get water in them, and they use a carbide mechanical seal. It's like a different way of sealing up a high pressure swivel, but I just don't like them. They're too maintenance heavy. They call it a maintenance-free bearing, but it definitely isn't. They only last in vacuum surface cleaner applications. You're lucky to get 3 or 6 months out of them, and they say that you never need to replace or redo the central shaft, and they just constantly wear out and go bad. So fuck that, I'm done with those things. I was wrong. They do include that seal in the seal kit. So we're gonna dig this thing out of here real quick, replace it with the new one. It doesn't look like there's too much wrong with that. Okay, we got our parts all nice and cleaned off. Get all the dirt and water out of there. This thing had quite a bit of water just kind of sitting in the plate seal cover, so I just doused it in WD-40, took an air compressor to it really good. It's just important to get all the water off of it and out of it, so there's no more potential for it to collect rust while it's sitting around at night. But just generally what I like to do is just kind of wipe off the excess grease, spray a bunch of WD-40, which kind of acts like a grease solvent, kind of dissolves whatever grease is left in there, and then just hit it with an air compressor. Air compressor, WD-40, and new grease is like the best way to get all the grime and the sand and the grit and the things that are going to trash those bearings, to get that out of there. And then this stuff is really good to have around. Some aerosol white lithium grease. I like to take this and kind of grease the shit out of everything. So we got that lower shaft seal replaced. We got an O-ring to replace on the outside of this thing. Here we go. This O-ring just sits on top here, but we got a little so you'll see the way this thing sits in there. It sits like this. You're going to want to have the spring side of the seal facing up. Just press that puppy in there, and these, when they're brand new, they're a little bit difficult to get in there. But what you can do is just grab something, kind of gently, just sort of tap on it. Just kind of get that thing set down in there. Another little one here. Spring side up. And the order these go on is first this silver one. Now what's going to happen is the edge of the shaft is chamfered there. You'll see along the profile, but it's going to want to push that seal out. So we're going to have to like kind of put our thumbs on top of that seal just to get it down and around that shaft. And then once we get it down, then we can kind of stuff it back in that gland plate to get it to sit flush. And when these things start leaking out of those weep holes, it's one of these two seals, either that one or that one, that has failed. That's where all the work is done to keep the water on this side of the bearings and on that side of the bearings. We don't want any water in this portion here. So once you get the silver gland plate, then the red gland plate goes on. Same deal. I'm gonna stuff this thing on there and then get that seal down around that shaft. There we go. And then just kind of get it stuffed down into that gland plate so that the seal needs to be flush with the top of this plate. So you can see it's raised up a little bit. There's not really any easy way to do this other than just kind of do it with your fingers or maybe a socket. Yeah, like a 1/4 inch drive socket that is 9/16, so you can just put that on there. There we go. So now you can see that seal is just flush with the top of that red plate. And when it's in that red plate, it causes the edge of the seal to squeeze around that shaft and really get a hold of it. And then we got a little O-ring that goes on top here. And then what I like to do, hit this with some aerosol lithium. Hit this with some aerosol lithium. Just get a bunch of lithium in there. And then I'll do the outside of this thing all over the place. And we can drop that puppy back down in there. This is going to be kind of an airtight fit, so we're going to kind of shove this thing down. And you'll see it'll kind of have this like spring-loaded effect. That's because there's air trapped in the bottom of this bearing, so squish that down, the air will eventually leak out of there and it'll sit flush and flat. And once we get that on, then we can take the cover, screw this puppy down, and then when we screw this thing down, that will also compress that plug all the way down into the housing. There we have it. And then once we get this mounted to the surface cleaner, we'll put a wrench on here and just tighten this cap down a little bit. Not too much, because this is aluminum with aluminum thread, which is really soft and it's really easy to rip that thread apart. So we're just gonna give it like maybe 10 or 15 foot-pounds just to kind of snug it up so it doesn't kind of come loose on us when we're working. That's it. We'll show a little video of this thing back together in just a minute. So this is NPT thread, or plumber's thread, or pipe thread, so it's a tapered thread, and which means it's got a limited lifespan, so we don't want to over tighten it, but we also don't want it to leak, because the way NPT threads work is they deform. That's how the gaps are taken up. So you can kind of make these last a little longer just by taping them up and then just putting the right amount of torque on it. You don't want to go crazy, just enough so it ain't going to come off. Okay, I got the spacer plates mounted back on. Time to chuck it back in the surface cleaner. I think one thing we'll do before we put this back in is just check out this filter and see how it's doing. Okay, the high pressure filter is in good shape. It's not a lot of times what happens is when they start getting plugged up, there'll be so much pressure on the outside of this filter trying to get the water through that it'll start collapsing the screen and ripping it to pieces, and then rocks and sand start getting into the nozzles. Take a little WD-40, a little compressed air. We're also going to check out this O-ring right there. O-ring's in good shape. Ding. Got out this goes. Bolts go in from the bottom. I like to leave these bolts a little loose until I get this thing centered up just the way I like it. So I'll leave them all a touch loose, check everything out, and then I'll cinch them up. Now what I'm looking for is just because there's so many spacer plates and adapters, I'm just looking to make sure that this nut is centered in these holes and it's not off to one side, because with all that slop with the adapter plates, they can kind of get off center a little bit, and the arms will end up hitting the sides and they're a pain in the ass. So I'll just have a look at it. But generally by the time you get them cinched up, it's pretty centered. It's off just a little bit, it's good enough for me. Install our arms back in. Just getting all the old plumber's tape off of here. Okay, so you guys, you know, you're probably like, what's up with these weird compression fitting surface cleaner arms? Well, there's multiple advantages to going with these. instead of like a normal spray bar that you guys normally get. And one of the biggest advantages, there's two big advantages. First of all, when they're in here, we can tune our surface cleaner arms for our rotation speed by changing the angle, and you can do that by virtue of this compression fitting. Second, you can make these yourself. So since we're wearing out arms so often and we're cleaning such different types of surfaces, it's good to be able to change the angle under the deck to control the speed of the surface cleaner and to tune that to the surface that we're working on. So if we're working on a really flat, smooth surface that's not very dirty, we want to be able to walk really fast without having squiggle marks in the ground. And when we do that, we'll tune these arms at a steeper angle so that they spin faster, which allows us to walk faster without having those tiger stripey squiggle marks. Now, if we got a really rough surface like aggregate or pervious concrete that takes a long time to clean, we want to take some of that angle out so that the water is spraying, for example, more obliquely straight down to the ground with a slower rotation speed. So instead of having them cocked off way to the side, we'll just have them cocked a little bit so that they're really digging into the surface. Now we know we're already not going to be able to walk very fast. We're going to be out there all day anyway, so we might as well just take that cleaning power and focus it more into the ground, give up some RPMs on the surface cleaner, and just make it easier. So we're constantly tuning the angle of our arms to account for the type of surface that we're cleaning, and that just comes with experience. So that's one of the reasons why I've gone to these compression fitting style surface cleaner arms. Now, a sort of good baseline to set these at, if you're not really sure how fast you want them to spin, is about the same angle as that. See that hexagonal head? Let me get this in the camera here. So if we take that hexagonal head and we say, okay, there's one point and there's another point. If you make that perpendicular to the ground, this angle will be canted off about 30 degrees off the ground, like that. That's a good angle to go with. About 45 degrees. 45 degrees, it'll start spinning really fast, but about 30 is pretty good for just a nice uniform distance that won't spin the arms too fast, will give you good penetration power, and probably give you a little bit more life on your bearing because it's all about RPMs. If you have less RPMs, it's gonna last longer. So that's a good rule of thumb to go with, is like this hexagonal, just draw a straight line from that point to that point, and you want that imaginary line to make a 90-degree angle with the flat surface of the ground. That'll give you about, I think it's about 25, 30 degrees of spray angle. And then one of the other tricks we do is when we're cleaning really abrasive surfaces like parking garages or pervious concrete. You can see, we talked about this before on the pervious concrete video, you wear down these arms really fast. Well, there's no reason why you can't spin this you know, like this direction for a couple of days, reverse the angle of the arms, and then spin it the other direction and wear down the other side of the arms. That's how you get a little bit more life out of these things. And in fact, I think when we go and test this thing, we're gonna, after I get this put back together, we're gonna hook it up to the pressure washer, and we'll play around with the angles a little bit so you can hear the difference in the speed that these are spinning versus the cleaning power that you're getting. So it's a balance between arm rotation speed and then penetration power of the nozzles. The more rotation speed you have, the more you give up penetration power. So that's a really steep angle on this side. We're going to wind up taking some off of that. And you want to generally not do this while they're tight. You want to go ahead and loosen it back up. Like that. Take a little bit of steepness off of it. Okay, deep penetration, slow RPMs. Okay, that's that. So we're just gonna put about just a couple of more degrees on this. Much faster. All right, guys, and we see that the top of the swivel is not leaking water anymore. That means our seal replacement took, and we're done. All right, guys. Hope you liked it. Have a good night. We'll see you on the next one.